It's not clear what happened on the way to Oz. I can say it. The basic idea 20 years ago that it might be good to have national standards in math and science because they are international languages. They're the same across countries. Why should we have different math or science standards across the states and be different from other countries is a reasonable question to ask. And I do think it might benefit, and there are scientists and mathematicians I know who would agree, that it would be useful to have first-class standards in those areas for all states. However, that's the caveat. If they're not first-class standards, they're not worth having.
Right.
There's no point in having any standards from on high if they're not first class. The only people at this point who are making a great deal of money out of the whole process are the high-tech companies and the test developers and professional development providers, which is a separate group. But that's where most of the money is going right now, to test developers, to the corporations selling the textbooks, all of which have to be redone. I mean, there's an enormous amount of money being laid out, and the question is, for what? If it's not being done to improve or strengthen public education, where is that money going? And it's going to sales for textbooks, curriculum materials, the technology that's being used that has to be installed in all of the schools in every state that adopted Common Core. It's not improving teacher training. It's not going to teacher salaries. It's not doing anything at the school level that anyone can see. Some of the questions on the sample items that have been released require students to have read other things in order to answer the question, which means that those other things may have to be in the curriculum. So it's like a backdoor way of bringing in curriculum materials, even though everyone says Common Core is just standards, not curriculum. But if the test comes, and I know in Massachusetts this happens with every test, the test will shape what teachers then know they will have to have in the curriculum for their kids to do well, particularly if the teachers are going to be evaluated for their jobs on these. I mean, it's a circular process, and you have to understand all the pieces. There are new accreditation standards that you should be aware of for colleges of education if you're not in one. And among the standards that are part of this newly merged group, there are two groups that merged together for accrediting education schools. One of the professional standards is that the teachers must be exposed to Common Core. So once you build it in to teacher training, whether they're doing it or not, I wouldn't know. This just happened this past August. But that will be a way to close the loop, and there's no exit. I don't think that the two national teachers' unions played any major role, so far as I know. They have each been given a little bit of Gates Foundation money, but it's not clear that either the NEA or the AFT played a major role. Other groups, testing groups, certainly, corporations were involved, and other individuals, but I don't think the unions per se at the national level, and they have at the state level in many states been in opposition to the teacher evaluation framework. So, because this is hitting their teachers. They're going along with it because it was an Obama administration proposal, and the unions, as you know, heavily support Democratic candidates, but I don't think they are the source of the major problem with Common Core. There are 4 major groups that were ignored in the funding of the development and dissemination and evaluation of Common Core testing. Parents were excluded all the way. State legislators were excluded all the way. Local school boards were excluded. I was told in Massachusetts and in a few other states that they were the last to hear from their state board of education that their powers had just been taken away by the state's board decision to adopt Common Core. So the State Board of Education, the high school, the teachers were the other group. who are not informed. The reason why all of this ferment is happening in this past year is because parents and teachers are finally looking at what they're teaching. 2 years ago, the state board vote was just beginning to be implemented. Superintendents knew they had to be informed by the Commission of Education because they're the ones that had to tell everybody else we're having new standards and so forth. But all the major groups that really affect education were left out in the darkness because there was no way, as far as I'm concerned in my own cynical attitude toward this, there was no way to buy them off. This is not just for public schools, because what's going to happen with the college readiness link to higher ed is going to affect every other group. Homeschoolers, private schoolers, charter schools, any group that may have a different curriculum is going to have to be tested for college readiness, and therefore they may have to use the Common Core curriculum. Who knows what will come down the pike from USED? I was speaking to an associate dean at the School of Engineering yesterday, and many people at the higher ed level do not understand that these standards are linked to higher ed. Those of us who do a lot of this talking and testifying in various states advise parents that probably their best energies and efforts could go to going to their local school boards, running for local school board elections, and talking to their state reps, because they usually know who their state representative is. Most people in most states know who that person is. They may not know their national senators or others, but they know who their state rep is. And it's at the state legislative level that this is going to be resolved in each state, state by state. And for Catholic students, it's going to be resolved in diocese after diocese, because the bishops have to make the decision. And this has already started in Wisconsin. 4 bishops have withdrawn from Common Core in Wisconsin. 2 other places. But they're facing the same problem, and it's just diocese by diocese, state by state. 2 states, New York and Kentucky, have given so-called transition tests that are along the way to Common Core, and most of the students bombed on these tests. And there are many people who think that that was planned for. One of the claims that came out of the pro-Common Core folks was that this shows how rigorous Common Core's standards are, even though the students couldn't have had a Common Core curriculum that fast. I mean, it was just voted in 2 years, in 2010. But what we don't know is where the cut score was in these 2 states, nor is there any access to the state test items. This is an important point that I'd like to point out. In Massachusetts, when we had the Ed Reform Act passed in 93, one of the statutory provisions was that within a year, all test items used for kids' scores have to be released. So parents and others every year could see all the test items in math, English, and then eventually science that were used. Nothing like that exists for Common Core. There is no way for teachers and parents or others to see the test items that are being used or developed. You're getting some samples released, but there's always a little careful proviso saying that this does not necessarily mean that the test will look like these items. It's non-transparent.